I wasn't supposed to hear the words that came through the half-open door. My daughter's voice was sharp, tired, and full of something I hadn't heard from her since she was a teenager. "I can't afford to help him anymore," she said, and the way she said him felt like a slap across my chest. I stopped in the hallway, one hand on the wall, wondering who she was talking to and why her voice carried so much resentment. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd misheard, but the silence afterward only made the sting feel deeper. I stepped closer, slow and careful, and listened as she sighed like I was a burden she had been dragging for years. "He doesn't understand how expensive everything is," she added. There was no warmth in her tone, no patience, only frustration. I knew she wasn't talking to me. She hadn't even noticed I'd come home early. She spoke as if I were some stranger who'd complicated her life, not the father who had kept a roof over her head through college, heartbreaks, and every mistake she ever made. Hearing her brush me off so easily made something inside me sink. When she finally saw me standing there, she didn't look embarrassed or guilty. She just ended the call and forced a flat smile. "You're back early?" she said, like nothing was wrong. I didn't ask who she was talking to. I didn't ask why she spoke as if helping me was some punishment she'd been forced to accept. I just nodded and walked past her, pretending I didn't feel the bruise forming inside my chest. But the uneasiness stayed with me, heavy and cold, because I'd never heard her speak about me with that kind of distance. As I sat down in the living room, I couldn't help remembering all the years I'd spent making sure she never went without. I worked overtime to pay for her field trips, cut corners so she could attend her dance classes, and saved every spare dollar to help her buy her first car. When she needed money during her divorce, I drained half of my savings without thinking twice. I never kept score. I never asked for anything back. I believed love between parent and child shouldn't need repayment. Maybe that belief made me blind. She walked past me on her way to the kitchen, her phone still in her hand. "Dad, you really shouldn't worry about bills," she said casually. "I'll handle everything." The way she said handle made something twist in my gut. It wasn't just concern, it was control. She already had access to one of my accounts, just to help with online payments, she had said months ago. I hadn't thought much of it then. Now I wondered how much she could see and what she had already done. That line, "I can't afford to help him anymore," kept echoing in my mind. I couldn't understand what she meant. Help me with what? And if she couldn't afford it, why was she the one with access to my money? What would you think if you heard your child speak about you like this? It started with something that sounded harmless, kind even. My daughter sat beside me at the kitchen table one morning, her voice soft in a way that made me lower my guard. "Dad, let me help with your bills," she said. "You stress too much, and you don't need to anymore." She placed her hand over mine like she was offering comfort, not control. At the time, I wanted to believe she meant well. I told myself it was just support, the kind any child would give a parent growing older. But the uneasy feeling from the day I overheard her lingered, quiet but steady. A week later, she brought the idea up again, this time with a bit more confidence. "We should put my name on one account. Just temporarily," she said. "It makes paying things online easier." She framed it as a simple convenience, something families did all the time. I hesitated, but she smiled like it was nothing more than a checkbox on a form. I signed, trusting her, telling myself it was still my account, my choice, and I could undo it any time. I didn't realize that one small step would open the door to something much larger. Soon after, she started picking up my mail from the box before I even reached the porch. "I'm just sorting things for you," she'd say, already opening envelopes. She stood over the counter reading letters intended for me, deciding which ones mattered. At first, it felt strange, but she brushed off my discomfort with a shrug. "You shouldn't have to deal with all this paperwork," she insisted. But watching her tear open envelopes without asking made me feel like I'd disappeared somewhere in the process. I didn't say anything, though. I held my silence the way many aging parents do, confused, unsure, hoping not to seem difficult. One afternoon at the bank, the discomfort grew sharper. She answered the teller's question before I could open my mouth. "He prefers I handle things for him," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The teller glanced at me, waiting for confirmation, and when I nodded, more out of surprise than agreement, my daughter stepped forward like she owned the space. She spoke as if she had always been the decision-maker, and I stood beside her, feeling oddly small, like a guest in my own financial life. I tried to tell myself it was still just help, but the balance between us was shifting. Her partner appeared not long after, introduced as someone good with money. He talked in calm, confident tones about budgeting, saving strategies, modernizing my accounts. I didn't ask for his advice, but he gave it freely, leaning in as if he had a stake in my future. Something about the way he studied my papers made the hairs on my neck rise. Still, I stayed polite. At my age, politeness sometimes replaces the courage we think we've lost. Last night, while sitting alone at my table, I realized something that chilled me. I couldn't remember the last time I checked my own bank statements. They weren't in the drawer where I used to keep them. They weren't anywhere I could reach. The first sign came in the form of a letter I didn't recognize. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, tucked between advertisements and medical appointment reminders. The envelope had the bank's logo stamped in blue ink, and when I opened it, I felt a small tightening in my chest. Inside was a notification about a transfer I didn't remember making. The amount wasn't huge, but it wasn't small either. Large enough to matter, small enough to slip under most people's radar. I read the letter 3 times, hoping the numbers would change if I blinked long enough. They didn't. When I showed it to my daughter, she didn't even look surprised. "Dad, you approved that last month," she said, waving the paper away like a meaningless receipt. "You just forgot. It was for one of your bills." Her tone was firm, almost scolding, as if her version of events was the only reasonable one. I wanted to argue, to say I would remember authorizing a transfer like that, but her confidence made my doubts feel foolish. I tried to swallow the confusion, but it sat heavy, refusing to go down. A few days later, I went searching for my checkbook so I could compare things myself, only to find the drawer locked. I tried another drawer, then another. Several of them wouldn't open, though I knew I had never installed locks. My heart thudded with a strange mix of frustration and fear. I stood there in my own study, surrounded by furniture I bought, tools I organized, drawers I used for years, and suddenly I couldn't access any of it. My daughter brushed it off when I asked. "I reorganized so things wouldn't get lost," she said. "You should have told me you needed that." Her explanation didn't match what I saw, but she said it so casually I felt cornered. Then her partner stepped in, more boldly. One afternoon, he sat at my table with a laptop open, showing charts and numbers I didn't ask to see. "You've been paying too much on certain things," he said. "We streamlined your accounts." Streamlined, a word that made it sound like they were doing me a favor when all I felt was a pit forming in my stomach. His eyes lingered too long on my documents, like he already knew the layout better than I did. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being studied the way someone studies an opportunity. That night, I opened a small notebook and started writing. Dates, amounts, conversations, anything that felt off. I wrote quietly, almost guilty, like I wasn't supposed to keep track of my own life. The more I wrote, the clearer the pattern became. Transfers I didn't approve, changes I didn't authorize, decisions made without me, in my name. By the end of the week, one truth settled in my chest like a weight I couldn't move. Someone was using my name, my accounts, my trust, without my consent. And they didn't expect me to notice. The first time I realized she was rewriting my mind was during a routine checkup. I sat on the edge of the exam table, waiting for the doctor to finish reviewing my chart, when my daughter stepped forward before I could speak. "He's been getting forgetful," she said, her voice quiet but firm, like she was sharing a sad truth. I turned toward her, stunned. "Forgetful?" I opened my mouth to correct her, but the doctor nodded sympathetically before I said a single word. The room shifted. Suddenly, I wasn't part of the conversation. I was the subject of it. After that visit, things changed quickly. When I asked to see my own medical notes, the receptionist hesitated. "Your daughter already took care of the paperwork," she said. "Took care of." 2 harmless-sounding words that left me cold. Later that evening, when I checked the patient portal online, it wouldn't let me in. My password didn't work anymore. I tried resetting it, but the confirmation email never arrived. I didn't know then that my mail had begun quietly disappearing before it reached me. A week later, she placed a stack of forms on my dining table. "Just sign these," she said. "They're safety documents." Something in her tone made the air feel heavier. The pages were thick with legal text, too dense to follow at a glance. When I asked what they were for, she softened her voice. "It's just to make sure you're protected if anything happens. You don't need to understand all the technical stuff." That word, technical, made me feel small, like a child being told not to worry about adult matters. I pushed the papers aside and said I'd read them later. She didn't argue, but the look she gave me made my stomach twist. Soon after, my appointments began shifting without my knowledge. I'd show up expecting my usual time, only to learn that it had been changed at the family's request. I asked my daughter why she was rescheduling things without telling me, and she sighed like I was being unreasonable. "Dad, you get confused. I'm just helping you stay organized." Her certainty chipped away at mine. I started second-guessing my own memory, wondering if I really had forgotten something. More mail vanished. Bills that used to arrive like clockwork stopped coming. Letters from the bank, from my insurer, even from friends. None of them reached my hands. When I mentioned it, she shrugged and said, "You probably misplaced them. It happens." Each dismissal felt like a small cut, and after a while, I stopped mentioning anything at all. That was when I began censoring myself. I chose my words carefully around her, afraid that any small slip would be used as proof that I wasn't capable. I felt like a man standing on thin ice, while everyone around me insisted it was cracking under my feet. By the end of the month, one fear settled into my bones. If she convinced others I was declining, who would believe me when I said I wasn't? I never planned to look through the drawer that morning. I only opened it because I needed a pen. But tucked beneath an old envelope, I found a small stack of bank statements my daughter must have forgotten to remove. The sight of my name printed across the top sent a faint tremor through my hands. For months I had stopped seeing anything from the bank, and a quiet fear had grown in that silence. Now, for the first time in a long while, I had something concrete to look at. I sat at the dining table and unfolded the first page. My breath thinned. There were transfers I didn't recognize, large, round amounts that meant nothing to me. Some were labeled as family support, others as joint planning expenses. I knew instantly I had never approved any of them. I turned to the next statement, and the pattern grew clearer. The withdrawals were regular, spaced just enough to avoid drawing obvious attention. Whoever planned this thought they were being careful. Then I saw a name attached to one of the transfers, my daughter's partner. It appeared on a payment memo linked to a consulting fee. I stared at that line for a long time. He had always spoken confidently about money, always hinting that older people needed guidance. I used to think he was just trying to impress her. Now I understood he had been studying me. I didn't panic. Instead, I pulled a notebook from the cabinet and began writing the dates of every suspicious transaction. I matched them against the timeline of when my mail had stopped arriving, when she began helping with bills, when the partner inserted himself into my life with advice I never asked for. The pieces lined up too neatly to ignore. By afternoon, I carried the statements and my notes to the bank. I didn't call ahead. I walked in quietly, holding the envelope to my chest like a fragile secret. The manager, a man I had known for years, greeted me with the same warm professionalism he always had. But when I handed him the documents, his expression shifted. He read silently, turning each page with a slow, careful movement, as if weighing the truth between his fingers. "Did you authorize any of these?" he finally asked. "No," I said, my voice steady but thin. He exhaled, a small, sharp sound. "Then we have a problem, and we need to address it." His words didn't feel dramatic. They felt honest, like someone finally naming what I had been trying so hard not to see. He explained that certain transfers required in-person approval or verbal confirmation, neither of which had been recorded. He advised me gently to review access permissions and consider safeguarding my accounts before more damage was done. Walking out of the bank, the air felt colder, but clearer too. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't confused. Something wrong was happening around me, and now I had proof. That evening, I sat in my quiet living room and made a decision. I needed help from someone outside my family, someone who would actually listen. When I walked back into the bank the next morning, I felt steady on the outside, but something inside me trembled. I carried the folder with my notes, my timelines, and the statements my daughter had forgotten to hide. I didn't know what the manager would say, but I knew I needed the truth spoken by someone who had nothing to gain from lying. He invited me into his small office and closed the door behind us. The room felt different this time, quiet, heavier, almost watchful. I placed the folder on his desk and slid it toward him. He opened it without a word. Minutes passed as he studied each page. His jaw tightened, his brow folded deeper. When he finally looked up, his eyes were serious in a way I had never seen. "Sir, why is your daughter's name still active on this account?" he asked. The question struck like a blow. I blinked at him. Still active? I thought it was temporary. She said it would help with a few bills. He shook his head slowly. Her access here isn't temporary. She has full authority. Transfers, approvals, even external payments. And some of these transactions should have required your confirmation. We never received it. My chest tightened as if the air had thickened. I felt exposed, foolish, and afraid all at once. He turned another page and tapped a line with his pen. These withdrawals, they fit a pattern we see in cases of financial exploitation. He said carefully, I'm not accusing anyone, but I need you to understand the seriousness. The word exploitation landed hard, like something I had been trying not to name finally stepping into the light. For months, I had wondered if I was overreacting. For weeks, I had doubted my own instincts. Now a professional, the man who had handled my accounts for years, was confirming that my fear wasn't a misunderstanding. It was real. I brought notes, I said quietly, pushing my notebook toward him. My handwriting looked unsteady on the page. Dates, amounts, conversations, missing mail, changes I never approved. He read through every line with a growing gravity. You did the right thing documenting all this, he said. I'm opening a formal internal review. Based on what I'm seeing, our compliance team will likely need to escalate it. I swallowed. Escalate it? To who? He hesitated only a moment. To Elder Protection Services. We're required to report suspected financial abuse. They'll look at this more closely. They may contact you directly. A strange mix of relief and grief washed through me. Relief that someone finally believed me. Grief because that belief meant the damage was deeper than I had let myself imagine. As I walked out of the branch, the sunlight felt harsher than usual. The truth was no longer hiding in shadows or half-answered questions. It stood in front of me, cold, undeniable, and far worse than anything I had wanted to face. I had lost more than money. I had lost trust. I asked my daughter to come over that evening. I didn't tell her why. I sat at the table with the folder from the bank open in front of me, the papers neatly arranged, as if order could soften what was coming. When she walked in, she looked irritated, not worried. That alone told me something about where we now stood. Dad, I don't have much time, she said, setting her purse down. Can we make this quick? I nodded slowly. Then let's get straight to it. I pushed the folder toward her. The bank reviewed everything. They found irregularities. They questioned why your name is still on my account. Her face tightened for a split second before she forced a smile. Oh, that. Dad, you're overthinking again. You asked me to help. Remember? You said it was getting stressful. I never asked you to control my money, I said, keeping my voice steady. They also said some withdrawals needed my approval. They never got it. She shrugged, eyes shifting away. You probably forgot signing something. Or maybe the bank messed up. You know how confused you get with paperwork. That sentence cut deeper than any number on a statement. She said it casually, like a practiced line. I opened another page. These transfers went to accounts linked to your partner. Do you want to explain that? For a moment, the room held its breath. Then came her answer. Quick, defensive, rehearsed. He was helping us reorganize things. You wouldn't understand how modern banking works. We've been trying to fix your mess. My mess? I whispered. All of this was done behind my back. She crossed her arms. Dad, you're being dramatic. You should be grateful we're stepping in. You can't manage like you used to. Before I could respond, a knock came at the door. 2 officials from Elder Protection Services stepped inside. Calm, professional, carrying folders of their own. My daughter's smile dropped. Ma'am, one of them said, we're here to follow up on the bank's report. We need to review the transactions associated with your access to your father's accounts. Her partner, who must have been waiting outside in the car, walked in behind them, eyes wild for a second before he looked down at the floor. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His presence confirmed everything. The officials explained the restrictions being placed on the account, the temporary suspension of her access, and the next steps in the investigation. My daughter kept interrupting. Small excuses, quick denials, claims of misunderstanding, but each one was met with quiet, factual contradiction. Every lie she tried to lean on broke under the weight of the evidence. When the officials finally left, the silence felt heavier than their words. She stood there staring at me, as if I were the one who had betrayed her. I realized then that whatever we once were, whatever trust held us together, was already gone, and I felt it break inside me, clean and final. In the weeks after the investigation began, my house felt strangely quiet, not peaceful, just quiet in a way that makes you hear your own thoughts too clearly. I found myself moving slower, not out of weakness, but because every step reminded me of what had been taken and what I had managed to protect. The officials kept me updated. The bank kept my account secure, and for the first time in months, no one else had access to my money but me. I made small routines to steady myself. Morning tea at the kitchen table, sorting my mail the moment it arrived, not hours later after someone else had filtered it, checking my own statements, reading every line carefully. I even went back to the little notebook where I had written all those early signs, the ones I once ignored because I didn't want to believe my own child could see me as a resource instead of a father. That notebook felt like a warning and a shield at the same time. My independence wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet. Quiet like turning on a light in a room that had been dim for too long. I walked to the bank on my own, spoke to the manager myself, and signed forms with my own hand, not because I doubted my ability, but because I needed to feel that control again. Aging doesn't mean disappearing, and needing help doesn't mean surrendering your dignity. Sometimes, in the evenings, I sit in my living room and think about how trust can be worn down without a single argument. It can fade under the weight of small lies, small excuses, small acts of control. You don't see the line breaking. You hear it snap only when it's too late to mend it. I still don't understand when my daughter stopped seeing me as her father and started seeing me as an account to access, a burden to manage, a problem to solve. But I've accepted something now. Betrayal doesn't always come with shouting. Sometimes it comes with a gentle voice saying it's just temporary, or just to help, or just this one time. And the scars it leaves behind aren't the kind that fade. They become quiet reminders of the importance of paying attention, of trusting your instincts, of protecting yourself even from people you never expected to fear. The legal process is still moving, slowly but steadily. Whatever the final outcome is, I've already faced the hardest part, realizing that love alone cannot stop someone from harming you if they've decided you are useful, not cherished. It's a truth I never wanted to learn this late in life. Now I carry forward the lesson that dignity must be defended, even in old age, especially in old age. And I end with a question that stays with me every night. What would you have done in my place?